Honorable Member for Castries South. Would you like the...
Yes, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I would like to commence by apologizing for being late this morning. I did indicate that I would have been present.
Honorable Member, your mic, please. I do wish to apologize because you were here and I did not make an apology on your behalf and you did indicate why you had to leave. So my apologies on that note.
Madam Speaker, because I did get a message chastising me for not being here this morning, and I know I did try my best despite the traffic from the north and the fear now that we will not have an improved network from Castries to Groseley. I did try my very best to be here. Madam Speaker, I rise today in opposition to the Appropriation Bill 2017-2018 and the budget address presented by the Minister of Finance. And I wish, Madam Speaker, to speak specifically on two aspects of the budget address, namely tourism and investment. And Madam Speaker, it's probably quite convenient or opportune that I am actually speaking after the minister in the ministry, the minister in the Prime Minister's office responsible for tourism and the minister who is responsible for investment. But before I go any further, Madam Speaker, I think I need to say a few words to the member from Ancillary Canaries. Because, Madam Speaker, he said a lot last night, and in the wee hours of this morning, because I did not hear him live last night, I tried to replay what he said to listen, and I must admit that I did not find very much. And it really brought to my mind the conduct of the member from Ancillary Canaries and this Honourable House. He's been the most vocal. And you'd recall during the debate on the estimates, the member for Beaufort South spoke of he being the smallest and shortest and being the loudest. And Madam Speaker, one thing I've quickly learned in this House is you must learn to take picong. When you give, you must learn to take. And Madam Speaker, I was a little disappointed by the reaction of the member for Ancillary Canaries, because if you give in picong, you must learn to take picong. And I'm not talking about crossing the line and being offensive or insulting. I'm talking about picong at each other. And I noted yesterday, Madam Speaker, that the member from Ancillary Canaries was being coached by the member from Castries South East. And I smiled because I was saying, Balfini. Because I hope the member from Ancillary Canaries realized that the member from Castries South East is very good at what he does. And it's because he's been himself. He is what he practices. That's him. And maybe the member from Ancillary Canaries, and I join him and two others have been the novice in this House. The four of us who are here for the first time. And we must all try to find our own personality, our own style in the House. And I probably would advise him to not try to be like the honourable member from Castries South East. And when he does get some picong about his size, he does not go crying and saying that the member from Beaufort South was a little too brutal on him. Because I'll tell you something, Madam Speaker, the member for Castries North, I will never disrespect him. Similarly, I will never disrespect the Prime Minister. I will ask him tough questions, and I will make sure he's always subject to rigorous examination, but I will not disrespect him. I will not disrespect the member from Castries North. He's a former Prime Minister. But also, Madam Speaker, you look at his size and you look at mine. I cannot fit in his clothes. The member from Ancillary Canaries should note that the member from Beaufort South, he cannot fit in his clothes, and you should respect him. The member from Beaufort South, he shops at Tall and Mighty. The member from Answer Canary shops in the children's section of department stores. He cannot fit in the clothes of the member from Beaufort South. And just like we are newcomers in this house, we have to earn our spurs. We must find our personalities, and we must learn to respect the senior members of this house. So, Madam Speaker, and I will come back to the honourable member a little later on, because he said a lot, and I will respond to him. But, honourable member, smile. Take it. You give picong, and then the moment you get a little blows, you hold in your belly and you're bending over. Take a few blows and smile. Smile, Madam Speaker. That's insulting. To say to him he disrespected the member from Beaufort South is insulting. Can I proceed, Madam Speaker? But, honourable member from Castries office, I have said to you before, I will not answer you unless you can sue Richard Frederick or go on his program and defend yourself. Until then, I shall smile every time you say anything offensive to me. But Madam Speaker, it is natural for me to reject the philosophical approach which guides the Minister of Finance. My approach is fuel, not by opposing for opposing's sake, but by sentiments nurtured in me by the words of our national anthem. These immortal words forever ring loud and clear in the receptacles of my mind. Sons and daughters of St. Lucia, love the land that gave us birth, land of beaches, hills, and valleys, fairest isle of all the earth. Wheresoever you may roam, love, oh love, our island home. Madam Speaker, as a young man, I dreamt of working in London, Rome, New York, Paris, and I thank the good Lord that I was able to achieve my dreams. But no matter where I worked, I was always driven by the words of the national anthem. Wheresoever you roam, love, oh love, our island home. Madam Speaker, what does it mean to love the land that gave us birth? For me, it means an appreciation of our patrimony, recognizing that the present hills, beaches, and valleys are the inheritance of future generations, that this fairest isle of all the earth is a common heritage of all St. Lucians. So, Madam Speaker, loving the land that gave us birth means understanding our heritage, our culture, and our identity. It means feeling the pulse of the people, the ordinary people, and the youth that will inherit this land. It means having and demonstrating respect for the sentiments of St. Lucians, more so as it relates to their patrimony, historical journeys, and achievements. It means understanding what is meant by having your umbilical cord buried right here. I love my island. And Madam Speaker, I've had to study overseas. And before my studies were over, I was anxious to go back home. I have worked overseas, and I could not help but be so anxious to return home. It is then, Madam Speaker, I understood what our immortal Nobel laureate, Sir Derek Walcott, meant when he wrote, "I am not home till Sesame sings." It is because I love the land that gave us birth that I can reject the philosophy which guides the tourism and investment approach of this government, and which is embedded in the budget statement. Quite simply, Madam Speaker, I can say to the Minister of Finance that St. Lucia is not for sale. As Dubois is fond of saying, Peya Papuvan. No. Madam Speaker, the budget is described as a growth-led strategy approach. Madam Speaker, I believe in a growth-led strategy. We on this side believe in a growth-led strategy because, Madam Speaker, we accept we need investment. Yes, we need to create jobs. Yes, we need economic growth. But does that mean we have to be reckless and irresponsible? That we must sacrifice the inheritance of future generations for the sake of short-term and personal gains? Are we saying to our people that once you want something, go for it, take it, ignore the people's concerns, trample on their rights? Is that a message? By all means necessary? And Madam Speaker, I heard the member from Answer Canaries again last night spoke about contamination and the need to cleanse an organization of certain people. Madam Speaker, if the member from Ancillary would read history, he would learn that there are some very unfortunate events in the history of mankind that came about because of cleansing. When you suggest to people you need to cleanse, Madam Speaker, and I can cite historical examples, and in more recent times, there was political cleansing taking place in certain countries. There's been racial cleansing, ethnic cleansing, Madam Speaker, and to suggest that an organization must cleanse itself of certain people, Madam Speaker, is the working and the making of authoritarianism, Madam Speaker. And the member from Ancillary is suggesting to an organization to cleanse certain people because they happen to be members of the St. Lucia Labour Party. And he said that the organization is tainted, Madam Speaker. And I asked him the question, since Cabinet has 2 persons who have worked before for Sandals, does that mean the Cabinet is tainted by Sandals?
Which organization is that?
Does it mean it is tainted by Sandals? It doesn't mean that, Madam Speaker. And the honourable member must be very careful when he starts encouraging cleansing of people in this land that we love.
Which organization?
Madam Speaker,
Which organization?
Madam Speaker, the honourable member does not learn, Madam Speaker. I just threw a pick on him, the member from Castries office came to his defence and said I was being insulted.
Yes.
Honourable member.
So which organization is that?
I believe, Madam Speaker, that what the Prime Minister wishes for every St. Lucian is not different to what any member of this House wishes for St. Lucia. And that is for employment opportunities, economic growth, a modern healthcare system and facilities, a revamped education system, and safety and security for all our children and visitors. But, Madam Speaker, our fundamental difference is how we approach and deliver these, and it is quite evident by the presentation of the Prime Minister that he plans to implement whatever he says he wants to do without a social conscience. And, Madam Speaker, whilst there have been many recommendations about many of these parasitic bodies that the Prime Minister referred to, the underlying fact that must be given in making tough decisions is the effect on people on our land. These decisions have snowball effects on households, on children, and on families, on communities. And we cannot be insensitive to the consequences of our decision making. We must make decisions, but we must never forget that people's lives are at stake. This is not a business that we are running. So when I hear certain members say, execute, 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 it reminds me of the firing squads, Madam Speaker. You executing the poor people of this country, Madam Speaker. They are executing, Madam Speaker, literally executing the lives and the future of children and families of this country, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, I ask the question, Madam Speaker, what is the economic basis for the development of St. Lucia as presented in the budget? And Madam Speaker, the member for Answer last night said he was just starting to warm up. I've not even started warming up yet, Madam Speaker. So, and I hope he's not leaving to go anywhere. I want him to stay there, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we heard all of last year from members opposite that they were limited by the budget of Kenny Anthony, that they were taking their time to prepare a development plan based on the old quadrant plan that Sir John Compton had, and that they will present it in this budget. And the Prime Minister presented it in his budget address. But what was there, Madam Speaker? The budget was vague and opaque. Almost every pronouncement came with further details to follow. Details will follow on tax reform. Details will follow on debt management. Details will follow on the National Health Care Fund. Details will follow on the supply warehouse. Details will follow on the privatization of postal service. Details will follow on public service management bill. Details will follow on the setting up of a temporary place for the courts. Details will follow on the relocation of the Natural Cultural Center. Details to follow, details to follow, details to follow. It's a details to follow budget. Madam Speaker, the developmental vision of this government is grounded in a deep belief in trickle-down economics. The Prime Minister in his address and in previous pronouncement had promised he would never deliver a deficit budget and that he would end borrowing. Yet we are seeing unprecedented borrowing. Never before we've had a budget presented in this Honourable House with such a large budget deficit. But, Madam Speaker, and of course the member can always disagree, and we can debate figures. And, Madam Speaker, the point is, Madam Speaker, there is unprecedented levels of borrowing. But let us stop for a while and forget all the figures, Madam Speaker. Forget deficit, overall balance, borrowing. Can I ask, Madam Speaker, for the people of Castries South, Fuasho, Old Cemetery, Turnell Road, Lakudoy, Firehouse, Marigo, Bassett Joseph, all the communities, what's in this budget for them? What's in it, Madam Speaker? Madam Speaker, you will see increased prices for flour, rice, sugar, cooking gas, gas for vehicles, bus fare, bread. There'll be no laptops for children, no assistance to any fire victims, no employment for night workers, no more cultural center, no more Radio St. Lucia, no more fish marketing corporation, no more marketing board, no more post office as we know it. On the other side, Madam Speaker, the government claims that it will pursue a tourism-led strategy that will attract investment and create employment. So, Madam Speaker, let us examine the budget address provisions for tourism. Little is said, Madam Speaker, except for page 12 and page 45, which says that $33.6 million will be allocated to the Department of Tourism, of which $28.9 million will go to tourism marketing and support for ELIF. The first question, Madam Speaker, is, are we going to pay back? Are we going back to paying for airline seats? Because the Prime Minister did say that in his budget address, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, let me share with you some of the statistics. And I want to start off, Madam Speaker, by saying what was inherited in 2011. 2011. At the time of the Labour Party coming to power in 2011, a number of properties in this country were in receivership. The Paradis, Landings, Club St. Lucia, Coconut Bay, Marlin Key, a number of them were in receivership. When the Tourist Board took over in 2011, and the member for Answer Canaries is fond of quoting, $6 million receivables were left. 10. Okay. When the Labour Party took over in 2011, $14 million were left behind in receivables. 1-4. And listen to that, Madam Speaker. $9.7 million was owed to one airline partner, a 64-seater plane. A decision that was made on the instructions of the Minister of Tourism at that time to subsidize that airline. $9.7 million owed out of a total of $14 million. Now, Madam Speaker, the Tourist Board between 2011 and 2016 has never attracted the amount of money that is being promised in this budget. In 2011-2012, $40 million. 2012-2013, $45 million. 2014-2014, $40 million. 2014-2015, $36 million. 2015-2016, $34 million. And that included monies for jazz and all other festivals and events, which is not included in this present allocation of almost $40 million. So the Tourist Board, with less money being allocated, was able to reduce the deficit they inherited from $14 million to what my records show is $6 million. But the member for Answer Canaries says it's $10 million. But I will go with this $10 million. So with a declining budget, the Tourist Board was able to reduce the receivables from $14 million to 10 or 6 million, depending on who you believe. Madam Speaker, with that declining budget, what was the Tourist Board able to achieve? Increased overall stayover visitors, 312,404 in 2011. By end of 2015, it was 344,908. And at that same time, Madam Speaker, remember, Club St. Lucia was closed. Papillon was closed. So a significant stock of your hotel bed is out. But yet, stayover arrivals increased from 312,404 to 344,908. Substantial growth in the U.S. market, from 122,356 in 2011 to 152,738 by the end of 2015, with a reducing budget and an inherited receivables of $14 million. Cruise arrivals have increased from 630,000 K in 2011 to 666,000 in 2015. Overall, on-island expenditure went up by 25% in the space of 5 years, with a declining budget. What was one of the most admirable achievements of the Tourist Board was its strategy to deal with airlifts. Because you recall, I said 9.7 million was owed to an airline. We were paying for seats. A policy decision was taken then to stop that practice and adopt a new strategy to get airlift. And here what happened. The US increased by 9%. Additional JetBlue services, United Airlines services, additional Delta services. Canada improved by 11%. And of course, the service with Condor was renewed. All of this, Madam Speaker, has resulted in an increased demand for St. Lucia. A feat achieved on a reducing budget with a debt overhang of $14 million, Madam Speaker. Now, Madam Speaker, the member from Ancillary Canaries, who is not the Minister of Tourism, is the Minister in the Prime Minister's office responsible for tourism, will claim that St. Lucia underperformed. The data I just gave you showed that St. Lucia performed. But let us look at St. Lucia's performance within the regional landscape. St. Lucia had the longest history of growth among a comparable grouping. Now, we'll take out the Caribbean islands, the smaller ones, the Eastern Caribbean. We will take out Jamaica, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, whatnot, because you have a larger side, larger bed stock. So we take comparative countries. We'll include Barbados in that. St. Lucia had the longest history of growth among those islands. St. Lucia performed above average for 2012 and 2014. And the only reason why St. Lucia was not above average for 2014 and 2015 was because Barbados and Grenada had huge increases because of the two Sandals properties that opened in Grenada, one in Grenada and one in Barbados. Other than that, for 4 of the 5 years, St. Lucia would have performed above the average for the Eastern Caribbean. Madam Speaker, is it true, and I heard the Prime Minister in his address thank the new minister in his office for the sudden revolution in tourism in St. Lucia. Is there a sudden revolution, Madam Speaker? The new TUI airline service, those things were negotiated 2 years ago. I read minutes of an airline committee meeting, that airline lift strategy committee meeting, that spoke of those negotiations taking place. Madam Speaker, cruise lines booked 2 years in advance. Everything that's happening now is that the country is riding on the momentum of all the hard work of the previous Tourist Board. That's what has happened, Madam Speaker. And yet, Madam Speaker, the staff of the Tourist Board was sent home, and they take pleasure in saying that we have disbanded the Tourist Board. Madam Speaker, I am a professional before I was a politician. I've worked in many professional capacities, and I respect professionals, regardless of their political stripes. I'm coming to that one, Honourable Member. I'm coming to that one, and I've warned you, do not interfere with me. Go on to Richard Frederick. Madam Speaker, I need to make that point, and I want the Prime Minister, when he's finished, I'll continue. Yeah. Madam Speaker, when you dismiss workers, professionals who serve their country, regardless of political party, Madam Speaker, it is one of the lowest acts to do. These are professionals, Madam Speaker. Number of persons with families who've worked hard all their lives, and because they believed to be tainted or they needed to be cleansed, they were sent home. And people take joy in doing so, Madam Speaker. We cannot build a country like this, Madam Speaker. And I have a lot of sympathy for persons who are treated that way, Madam Speaker. So all that has done so far, Madam Speaker, is that this new minister has dismantled the operating structure of the SLTB, causing pure confusion in the marketplace, increased the tax on travel to St. Lucia, no new marketing initiatives, and he has killed the spirit of the Jazz and Arts Festival. Now, Madam Speaker, I'm not going to join many people who've already spoken of the doom and the failure of Soleil St. Lucie or Soleil St. Lucia. I'm not going to do that, Madam Speaker. Let us judge it over the next 2 to 3 years. But, Madam Speaker, I have a fundamental difference with you having spent 25 years to build a premier jazz festival in the Caribbean and one of the best known globally, and for you to totally abandon it like this, Madam Speaker. Thousands of people got to know St. Lucia because of the jazz festival. It was a successful endeavor, Madam Speaker. And for you to decide that I'm not suggesting you should not add on other attractions, but to totally cast aside the St. Lucia Jazz Festival, and of recent time the St. Lucia Jazz and Arts Festival, one of the most inspiring events in the history of the Jazz Festival that I visited last year was the Arts Village near the Shock Roundabout. When I visited, I got goosebumps, Madam Speaker, to believe that St. Lucia could have produced this.
How much you paid for your ticket?
Madam Speaker, the honourable member is a real jokester. Madam Speaker, he's a real jokester. I've told you, Madam Speaker, tell him he cannot fit in the clothes of certain people. You understand, Madam Speaker? And I'll tell you how much my ticket costs, Madam Speaker. I have no difficulty in paying to go anywhere. I support the arts, I support sports. I go to fields, to events, and I pay my money because I like to support it, Madam Speaker. And as people know that, before politics, I had a life. I was a professional, and I worked in Dubai, Singapore, London, New York, Madam Speaker. I was a professional before. I don't have to depend on politics to give me a free ticket, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, I will give Soleil St. Lucia a chance to succeed. But I will tell you one thing. I think St. Lucians are hurt by what this government has done to the St. Lucia Jazz Festival. Enough said. Madam Speaker, I cannot help, and the member from Castries South East just shouted, that's why I wanted to bring cruise ships for Cricket World Cup. So let me spare a few moments, Madam Speaker, to speak about Cricket World Cup in St. Lucia. And Madam Speaker, I want to quote the member from Mico South. Hear what he said during his budget, during the closing of the debate on the estimates. First of all, in 2007 to 2011, we had the construction for the Cricket World Cup 2007, and after all the hype, ended up being a complete disaster. You say it ended up being a complete disaster. In fact, St. Lucia spent nearly $85 million on hosting Cricket World Cup, and we had a stadium already. But we've never really had a thorough investigation as to where the $85 million went. But I remember who was the CEO of Cricket World Cup in 2007 was. Let's go again. We never really had a thorough investigation as to where the $85 million went, but I remember who the CEO of World Cup Cricket St. Lucia was in 2007. Madam Speaker, Cricket World Cup was not relevant to the debate on the estimates, so clearly it was an attempt to attack me. So please bear with me, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, when I got involved in Cricket World Cup, a big book had been circulated. In that big book, there were projections of all the tourism benefits Cricket World Cup would bring to the region. And at my very first meeting, I asked, where did those figures come from? Because they did not look realistic. And I was told there was a tourism guru who had advised Cricket World Cup on those figures. And I inquired, who was that guru? And it was Alan Chasney. He sat on the Cricket World Cup regional board. He can deny it, Madam Speaker, the member for Mico South. I was the local CEO. Honorable Fortuna Belrose worked with me as the operations manager at Cricket World Cup. And she can tell you, the member for Mico South was the chief advisor for Cricket World Cup, saying that there'll be thousands of people coming to this region and asking Cricket World Cup to tell government to invest in cruise ships, in expanding hotel stock, because there will be thousands and tens of thousands of people coming to this region. So, Honourable Member for Castries Office, when you say to me, I wanted to bring cruise ships, I will tell you something. No, I'll remind you. Don't just stop. I will remind you. Madam Speaker, when the member says that, you know who advised Cricket World Cup that we will need cruise ships? The member for Mico South. And he can deny it, Madam Speaker. He can say he never advised them, and he can always stop me on a point of elucidation. I will yield to him to say that he was not the one who advised. But, Madam Speaker, let me continue. So we were told...
I stand up on, Madam Speaker, and Standing Order 34B, I believe it is, on a point of hallucination. In fact, if the member wants to impugn my name, the honourable member wants to impugn my name, I would suggest that he bring some proof here. Because like him, I inherited a situation. And it was not for me. I was a member of a board of 17 people, of which, in fact, the CHTA, and it's on public record, Madam Speaker, that the CHTA said that they should not be doing it because it was in the middle of the Christmas season. And in fact, the CHTA was never in support. And that is on public record. But what he cannot provide on public record is any evidence, and I'm asking him to withdraw the statement, that there's any evidence that Alan Chastney was the guru behind the numbers projecting what the tourism was going to get. That is the numbers that were coming from the government, and the Hotels Association, the Caribbean Hotels Association was very clear that even the numbers of rooms that we had available in the middle of the winter could not generate those numbers. So I'm asking him to please withdraw the statement.
Madam Speaker, I might have been minded to withdraw it, except that the member so wrongfully suggested that he told them not to do it because I was during the middle of the Christmas season. Cricket World Cup was in April and May, Madam Speaker. It wasn't in no Christmas season, Madam Speaker. The honourable member does not even recall or know what he's talking about. I will not yield this time, honourable member. I shall proceed. So, Madam Speaker, I will not yield this time. I yielded once, I will not yield. Honourable member, I will continue. I will not yield this time. I gave you one chance and you blew it. Madam Speaker, you just said Christmas, honourable member.
Winter.
Oh, winter. April, May is not winter. Madam Speaker, so, but I'll be generous to the honourable member. I will not say he was the chief tourism guru. I'll say he was one of the persons who served on the regional cricket board that advised and put in the bid book that those were the numbers we should expect. But Madam Speaker, I remember I made a presentation at Rex St. Lucian to the SLHTA on St. Lucia's preparation for Cricket World Cup. And we were told, and the honourable member was there, we were told, Madam Speaker, we can never do it. St. Lucia will never be ready. There'll be too many people coming in. We will not be able to do it. Madam Speaker, history said otherwise. But you know the other thing I remember about Cricket World Cup, Madam Speaker, and I smile sometimes when I remember it. Elections was December 11th, a Monday. On the Tuesday, I got a call from Don Lockerbie. He was coming to St. Lucia on the invitation of the honourable member from Mico South to meet the person who was going to be Minister of Sports and to meet the incoming Prime Minister. And one of the items they wanted to discuss was firing me as CEO of the local organising committee. The honourable member from Mico South came upstairs Colony House, where our headquarters was located, to meet Mr. Don Lockerbie. And when he entered the room, I expressed some choice words to him, which I cannot repeat in this house. I will not repeat it. But I told him then, for you who had never stepped into this office to advise any of us on how to better St. Lucia hosting of Cricket World Cup, but would come today to ask Cricket World Cup to fire me, says a lot about you as a person and as a St. Lucian. Madam Speaker, but you know what happened, Madam Speaker, is a lesson about politics. The new board fell under the member for Groseley, and it was chaired by a gentleman who was a friend of mine. We campaigned hard against each other in 2001. He on the side of the member for Groseley, I on the other side. But we never became enemies. Never. And of all persons to be made chairman of the board is that friend of mine, Lon Theophilus. And when I indicated to him the experience I had with the member from Mico South wanting to fire me, he said to me, the member for Groseley has made it very clear he has no intentions of anybody firing me. Get the job done, make St. Lucia proud. That's what the member from Groseley said. He's changed now. He's firing people 90% of all those. But then he wasn't, Madam Speaker, but he wasn't exactly as he is now. Because and I am telling Madam Speaker, and I got support from the member from Groseley during his time of Cricket World Cup, and I got support from Lon Theophilus as chairman. Madam Speaker, and Madam Speaker, let me end Cricket World Cup to say something. Madam Speaker, when we left, we were supposed to table a report before Parliament and an auditor's report of how the money was spent. Honourable Belrose can testify. A report was sent to the government, auditor's report, which stated that millions of dollars were left behind in the account of Cricket World Cup. Was that report ever tabled, honourable member, in this House? Was the audited report ever tabled in this House? So when you are going to ask, and you're going to say there was never a thorough investigation of Cricket World Cup monies, The responsibility was on you and your other colleagues to table in this House the report and the auditor's report to say how much money. And I am asking in this honorable House, the honorable member made the statements. Can you tell St. Lucia where did the millions left behind from Cricket World Cup, where did it go? Now, I'm not suggesting anything untold happened with the monies. I'm not suggesting that. But if you want a thorough investigation, start by saying where the millions of dollars left behind, where is it right now? I assume it might be in some account in the Treasury, Madam Speaker. But by then, Madam Speaker, I had left to work in New Jersey, Madam Speaker. But you know what Cricket World Cup taught me, Madam Speaker? That as St. Lucians we can achieve when we come together as one, regardless of political affiliation. My right-hand person is now a minister of the United Workers' Party government. And we worked as a team beautifully. We laughed, we joked, pecan at each other, but we never allowed political differences to deter us from the task of making St. Lucia proud. And you know what was the consequence of that, Madam Speaker? When the ICC wanted to host a World T20, Madam Speaker, they came to St. Lucia to look for the best staff that they had during Cricket World Cup. During match days, we had over 1,700 St. Lucians mobilized throughout the country. Police, talk about it, to make sure those matches were successful. And the ICC said, we want to go to St. Lucia. And they asked, who was the CEO in St. Lucia? And they said, we want that person to head the World T20. And then we started the World T20 preparations and hosted it in the region from St. Lucia, Madam Speaker. So when the honourable member and the member for Castries office wants to talk about, you think that's cricket, you think that's cricket, you think that's cricket, that is what cricket left behind in St. Lucia. We used to host the best matches in St. Lucia. England, Australia, India. You know who we host now, Madam Speaker? Afghanistan. That's the legacy of the member of Castries office. Madam Speaker, let us look at investment, Madam Speaker. Members on this side believe that St. Lucia needs investment. The St. Lucia Labour Party was the party in government which passed the most progressive incentive and stimulus legislation to promote investment. We did, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we sought and approved a number of major investment projects before the meeting office. So we know how critical it is to have investments. We are pleased, Madam Speaker, and I was pleased to hear the member for Strozel Saltibus announce that they have decided to continue the plans that we had for at least the Hotel Lanes constituency. And to hear the member of Ancillary Canaries say that they're going to continue the plans to increase our bed stock, I think probably it's the member from Mico South who said it, by over 2,000 beds over the next 5 years. But, Madam Speaker, I take you to the budget address from the Prime Minister, pages 12 to 14, Madam Speaker. And let's look at the projects that will lead growth in this country over the next few years, Madam Speaker. The first one, Madam Speaker, is Royalton. Royalton was conceived, was built under the St. Lucia Labour Party, and it was opened under the United Workers' Party. Madam Speaker, Harbour Club will be open towards the end of this year. Again, it started under the Labour Party. It will be completed in the United Workers' Party. Madam Speaker, Coconut Bay expansion, discussion started under the Labour Party, will be completed under the United Workers' Party. Madam Speaker, the Fairmont development Shabusha that the member from Strozel Saltibus spoke about, Madam Speaker, and he's made it very clear, and I appreciate his honesty, Madam Speaker. But, Madam Speaker, there is one aspect of it I need to clarify for the records of this House. And the member from Mico South again, Madam Speaker, was saying how we sold the land with the road. And, Madam Speaker, the people down in that area, Morgouge and the surrounding areas, Madam Speaker, are a little distressed by the fact that the road will be closed and they need to take a detour that will add almost half an hour on their journey times. And in response to it, persons are saying we sold the land with the road, knowing that they were going to close it. And I've circulated as a document of the House, Madam Speaker, the concept of the hotel that was presented to us, and you will see on the concept that the road was always part of what they intended to be the development, Madam Speaker. So it is wrong, Madam Speaker, and I'm very heartened, Madam Speaker, that the member for Strozel Saltibus did not go down that road, Madam Speaker, but the member for Mico South did. And he did, Madam Speaker. Of course, Madam Speaker, the developers have asked for the road detour. And they first raised it, Madam Speaker, before the government changed. And we indicated to them This is a matter for the Ministry of Infrastructure and for discussions in the community. Of course, elections interceded and there was a change of government. So there is no truth, and I want the residents affected to know that there is no truth that we sold any land knowing that the road would have been blocked. The drawings tell you what the concept was because it made it very clear to them the critical importance of the road to the people in the neighboring communities. Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister announced that Redriff Beach will now host a Curio by Hilton, replacing where Rex and Lotion is. I will come back to that one, Madam Speaker.
So who started that?
The honeymoon, I'll come back to it, Honourable Member. Honeymoon Bay Resort in Canals, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I know from our time there were discussions on such a hotel. And I will say later on, Madam Speaker, I know when we did our due diligence on the developer who at that time wanted to build a hotel, he failed the due diligence. So, Madam Speaker, I will ask the Prime Minister later on to explain to me whether it's the same developer and whether a man who failed due diligence has been allowed to invest in St. Lucia like this. But we'll come to this one. These are ticklish matters, Madam Speaker, but we will speak about it in a while. The range developments, Madam Speaker, that the Prime Minister was so critical of, I am glad despite all his criticism, Madam Speaker, he's going to allow the project to go ahead. But I want the Prime Minister to remember the Carlton, Ritz-Carlton development in that same area. Who gave away St. Lucian lands, and that the new St. Lucia Labour Party coming in 2011 had to buy back the Black Bay lands and the Canal lands to a tune of almost $60 million. Who was Minister of Tourism then when that decision was made? And St. Lucia lost all those lands. But he's critical of it now, but I've heard he's going ahead with the project. He announced it in his budget address, so I'm very pleased that employment will be created for St. Lucians. Madam Speaker, he announced...
Who sold the lands of Pigeon Point?
Who sold? Madam Speaker, the honourable member is ignorant of St. Lucia's history. The St. Lucia Labour Party was the one who made Clico, who owned Pigeon Point, to return it to the people of St. Lucia, honourable member. So don't ask me who sold Pigeon Point, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, can you caution the member from Ancillary Canals for me, please, Madam Speaker? Can you caution him? Madam Speaker, Sandals Resort was announced by the Prime Minister. The development for Sandals Resort started under the St. Lucia Labour Party. But, Madam Speaker, I listened to the budget address by the Prime Minister. I listened to the member last night from Ancillary Canals, Madam Speaker. You know, honestly, Madam Speaker, there are people in here who do not know that Pigeon Point was not owned by St. Lucia until the ending of the 1990s, Madam Speaker. Can you imagine that? And we are sitting in the highest chambers of this land, and people are feigning ignorance about those matters. Sandals Resort was announced by the Prime Minister. But the Prime Minister, nor the member for Ancillary Canals announced. And I would like the Prime Minister to explain to us, because circulating yesterday on CNBC, on Reuters, and a few other news feeds was that the Sandals hotel chain is exploring options for sale. And therefore, if that story is true, and like I said, it came from CNBC, Reuters, that Sandals Hotel has engaged Deutsche Bank to explore options for sale and divestment of Sandals. And what is the consequence of that for the building of the Sandals Resort? And I assume, Honourable Member from Ancillary Canals, since you spoke about people being tainted, you might be so tainted to be able to give me a response at the appropriate time. Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, so those were the hotels that were announced by the Prime Minister in his budget address, Madam Speaker. Almost all of them, Madam Speaker, except one, Curio by Hilton, started under the St. Lucia Labour Party. All of them. But, Madam Speaker, I want you to note something about the data that the Prime Minister gave, and I want all members to help me understand it. Madam Speaker, just follow this. Curio by Hilton will have 500 luxury rooms, page 14, Madam Speaker, but will cost $100 million US. 500 luxury rooms will cost $100 million US. Honeymoon Bay Resort in Canals will have 250, half, but will cost $360 million. 360 million, page 14 of the Prime Minister's budget address I'm quoting from. Okay, all right. 300, okay. Because you're speaking about two hotels. Okay, two hotels, so 340. Okay. 500 will cost 100 million. 340 rooms will cost 360 million. Okay, with a golf course. Range, 180 rooms will cost 130 million. Sandals, 350 rooms will cost 250 million. Explain to me how a hotel that's going to cost 500 million, 500 rooms, will only cost 100 million. You follow me, Madam Speaker? If you just look at the cost per room, there's something abnormal about that figure given for Curio by Hilton at Redry Beach. There's something curious about it. Madam Speaker, so there's something unusual about those things, about those figures, and I'm sure the honourable member will explain. But there's something else, Madam Speaker. How many of those projects are deemed to be CIP? So, Madam Speaker, Fairmont will be CIP, Canals will be CIP, Range will be CIP. 3 of those projects will all be CIP projects. So it says a lot about the importance and the reliance on CIP moving forward, Madam Speaker, a topic we shall come back to shortly, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in all our endeavors on this side, Madam Speaker, we were guided by a clear principle that we will never sell St. Lucia, that we will never agree to recklessness and disdain for St. Lucians, that we will never vulgarize our country and its people, Madam Speaker. And I ask, Madam Speaker, why can't we conceive of a St. Lucia that is a reflection of our personality, our history, our islandness? The world is in awe of our natural beauty, so much so that we have a World Heritage Site. Do we have to think of causeways and skyscrapers to define ourselves? Do we have to believe that every piece of idle land is useless land? Do we have to believe that history has no place and Pigeon Point can be desecrated? Do we have to believe that the Suffrage Cemetery must be uprooted to be replaced by a skyscraper hotel, Madam Speaker? That was actually a plan in the last UWP government, as a people of Suffrage. There was a proposal by our Minister of Tourism then to do so. Do we have to believe that it is a choice between snakes and jobs? I believe, Madam Speaker, that we can build a St. Lucia that can be chic, sophisticated, and charming. It does not have to look like Dubai, Miami Beach, Shanghai, or Hong Kong. Why can't we look like simply beautiful St. Lucia with its own uniqueness? It is for this reason, Madam Speaker, that we had not signed and presently reject the proposed DSA project it is present for, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, I refer to page 19, and Madam Speaker, do inform me of my time at the appropriate moment.
You now have 15 minutes within which to complete your presentation. Honourable Member for Castries East, Leader Opposition.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise and stand in order 3210 to request an additional 30 minutes for the member for Castries South.
Honourable members, the question is that Standing Order 3210 be invoked in order to allow the Honourable Member for Castries South an additional 30 minutes within which to complete his presentation. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. Honourable Member for Castries South, you are now due to complete your presentation at 1 o'clock.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker and honourable members. Thank you very much. Madam Speaker, I was referring to page 19 of the budget address. Madam Speaker, DSH is not St. Lucian, not in its terms and conditions, and not in its design. Madam Speaker, how can a government that professes to love St. Lucia, that asks us to proclaim that I am St. Lucia, sign an agreement which provides the elements which the leader of the opposition highlighted yesterday? An agreement that provides a buyback clause, Madam Speaker, that if the investor within 2 years cannot mobilize 200 developers, he has a right to invoke the buyback clause, Madam Speaker. How could you sign an agreement that has the escrow account provisions that were signed, Madam Speaker? Madam Speaker, how can you agree to sign an agreement, Madam Speaker, where the government has to offset the cost of purchase of land by the private developer, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, how could you sign an agreement that provides no security for St. Lucian workers, that gives away the land where the stadium is, that guarantees CIP approval in 45 days? And Madam Speaker, whilst all those provisions hit at the core of who we are at St. Lucian, the biggest insult in this proposal is the business plan, Madam Speaker. And there are members on the other side who have some business training. Madam Speaker, in the agreement, the developer included a clause that spoke of the gross development value of the project. Madam Speaker, why would you sign an agreement that has that, Madam Speaker? Madam Speaker, let me explain to you the significance of that. And the honourable member from Strozel Solibus is a banker, so you can understand what I'm saying. Madam Speaker, and it's according to how the CIP works, because the developer was exceedingly smart in ensuring that was put in the agreement, knowing that he's applying for CIP status, Madam Speaker. If a developer comes to you and he says, I want to build a hotel, and the cost of the hotel is $100 million. I have 40 million equity, and I want to raise 60 million from CIP. Accordingly, if you approve the project, you will give him 200 citizenships allotted to him. So 200 by 300,000 is 60 million. 60 million and 40 million, he can build a hotel. He operates it and he makes a profit. But if that same developer comes to you and he's not speaking gross construction costs, he is saying gross development value, which means the retail value of the development when it's finished. And he tells you, what I want CIP approval for is a gross development value of 200 million. Stand on what, Madam Speaker?
Standing on the point of order, let's hear it.
34A.
34.
Madam Speaker, the member for Castries South continue to speak about this agreement that nobody knows about. There is an internet document, Madam Speaker, that is an alleged document. And the members opposite continue to make it look like there's some formal agreement in this House.
Honourable Member for Castries South East, I take the point. Honourable Member for Castries South, I have indicated and I have ruled that the document will be referred to as the purported or alleged agreement.
Thank you,
Please
Madam
be
Speaker.
so guided.
The purported or alleged document that the member from Microsoft agreed that was a legitimate document and authentic. So I shall move on, Madam Speaker. But Madam Speaker, it's on YouTube. If you had a projector, I would play it now to show you the interview where the member from Microsoft said. But Madam Speaker, I'm losing time, so let me continue. The alleged document, yeah, Madam Speaker. So I was saying, Madam Speaker, if a developer comes to you and instead of saying $100 million, he says gross development value of $200 million. But remember, he has equity of 40 million. So he now has to raise 160 million. So you have to give him citizenships to the value of 160 million, which is about 500 odd. But he builds it for 100 million. So what happens to the other 100 million? It goes as profit, Madam Speaker. So he's building the same hotel, but before he even starts operating it, he's made a profit of 100 million. Because the construction cost is 100 million. So you have to be very careful, Madam Speaker, that when you approve the projects, you do not approve gross development value, but you approve gross construction costs. The developer is planning to build a project, $2.7 billion, Madam Speaker, and is asking the country for over 9,000 citizenships, 9,000 passports to be able to finance it, Madam Speaker. 9,000, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, in his business plan, Madam Speaker, from information that I have, Madam Speaker,
Madam Speaker, point 34B, a point of hallucination.
Madam Speaker, I do not have to yield, Madam Speaker. Prime Minister, can you allow me to
Where does the
finish?
number 9,000 come from, Madam Speaker? Where does the number
Prime
9,000 come
Minister,
from?
understand please, on a point of elucidation, remember the member need not yield, and he has chosen not to yield to you. So he continues.
Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister can prove all that has been said on the internet wrong, by being more transparent on DSH. He can be more transparent. He delivered a budget address, and nowhere in it were the concerns of St. Lucians addressed. He was deliberately vague, Madam Speaker, and he insulted the people of St. Lucia in this chamber by having the investors sit in this honourable House, Madam Speaker, during a budget address, Madam Speaker. Never before has that happened. So, Madam Speaker, he needs to be very careful, Madam Speaker, when he seems to suggest that people should not speak about DSH, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, the construction cost of the project, Madam Speaker, is about $1.7 billion. So the developer is going to make about $900 million profit before he even starts up making any operational profit, Madam Speaker. This, Madam Speaker, is a rip of our country, Madam Speaker. And one of the reasons why we will never support the terms and conditions of DSH. And, Madam Speaker, it was amazing to see how some honourable members, when the flashing mirrors, when the beautiful drawing was put up on the screen, wow, wow, wow. And I'm saying to myself, see, there were some members, I must tell you, on the opposite side, who did not applaud. And I was watching, Madam Speaker, because it said a lot about the flashing mirrors and what really appeals to them. It's not the figures and the story behind the development. It's how beautiful the picture looks. And it has high rise, so therefore it's going to make St. Lucia the new Dubai. Madam Speaker, what are the figures behind it? When a developer tells you he wants to build a $2.7 billion project using your passports, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister says that only phase 1 has been approved, Madam Speaker. Then, Madam Speaker, share the details with us, Madam Speaker. Share with us, give us, in this honourable House, the business plan behind phase 1. Because I'm sure, Madam Speaker, based on the documents I had seen when I first received the business plan from the developer, Madam Speaker, he's asking for about 2,000 passports for him to be able to finance phase 1, Madam Speaker. The Prime Minister has to come clean with this nation and give us the details on DSH, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, he promised he would do it. His attaché promised she would do it. His communications director promised she would do it, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister in his budget address said we must be bold and courageous. And he quoted the Rosewood Dam, Millennium Highway, the Marina. But all those projects, Madam Speaker, were done by Sir John Compton. And may I say to the Prime Minister, he's no Sir John Compton. Look at the projects he was associated with. Boxing in Paradise, Ritz-Carlton in the South, Madam Speaker, Rum and Food Festival, Madam Speaker. And when the Honourable Member from Ancillary Canaries speaks about lawsuits against workers from CCC, Madam Speaker, I need him to go and do his research and find out about the great lawsuit they had in the St. Lucia Tourist Board about who really invented jazz in St. Lucia. Ask the Honourable Member to find out how much money did St. Lucia have to pay to settle the rights of who really originated jazz in St. Lucia, Madam Speaker. But, Madam Speaker, how can a government, Honourable Member, I've said to you, I'm inviting you to give all the information to the nation. How can a government which loves St. Lucia agree to the establishment of a dolphin park at our most decorated and well-known historical site, Pigeon Point? And, Madam Speaker, Richard Branson was in Barbados yesterday, and he was speaking about Virgin Cruises. And I want to read to you what he said, Madam Speaker. He issued a stern word of caution to the authorities in Barbados to preserve the environment in order to protect the island's bread and butter tourism industry. He spoke of the importance of recycling and called for an enormous effort to safeguard turtles and other sea creatures, as well as reefs, as well as major tourism attractions. At the moment in Barbados, the most important thing you have is tourism. Why do people come to Barbados? They come for its beauty and the species that are in the oceans of Barbados. And so a much greater priority should be placed on that. Madam Speaker, Richard Branson in Barbados yesterday, extolling Barbadians to do more to preserve the environment, to cherish the heritage and the sites, because people come to see us for our beauty and for those environmental sites we have that are so treasured. In St. Lucia, we seem to be going the reverse way. That it does not matter, Madam Speaker. Destroy it because we want to create jobs, Madam Speaker. Yes, we must create jobs, Madam Speaker, but we must always remember we are the custodians of the future generations, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the DSH agreement, the Dolphin Park project, and among others, Madam Speaker, tell us that this government is reckless, callous, and indifferent about St. Lucians. And what we think about the land that we love The actions of this reckless and disrespectful government will forever be recorded in the history of this country. Madam Speaker, let me focus on two other investment projects quickly. Madam Speaker, the member for Mako South, in closing the debate on the estimates of expenditure and revenue, Madam Speaker, spoke about, in fact, in his budget address, Madam Speaker, on page 15, he spoke about Ojo Labs International. It is a most disturbing decision by the government, Madam Speaker, but one consistent with the approach of this government to investment, putting St. Lucia for sale. Madam Speaker, I refer to the concessions that the Cabinet of Ministers have agreed to give Ojo Labs. And I want the Prime Minister to be transparent and explain the decision of Cabinet on this matter. Madam Speaker, how can a government agree to put in 98% and invest at 2% in an investment project in this country? Government is putting 98%, the investor 2%. Government has agreed, and the Prime Minister can deny it, to pay to retrofit a factory shell for the investor, $4 million. Pay to retrofit the factory shell, $4 million. Government to pay all the recurrent operational costs, electricity, water, internet, every month for the developer, for the investor. Concessions for all the vehicles he wants, and a boat, Madam Speaker. Why does a man coming to set up a call center have to get concessions for a boat, Madam Speaker? Oh, boats are duty-free. Okay, Madam Speaker. Pay $1,000 towards the salaries of the first 100 workers for 18 months. Let me say it again, Madam Speaker. The government of St. Lucia will pay the salaries, $1,000 a month, for the first 100 workers for 18 months, $1.8 million. After that, the government will pay $500 towards the salary of all the workers for an undisclosed number of years. Assuming 150 workers, Madam Speaker, it means $1 million for every year thereafter. The people of St. Lucia have to pay that for an investor. Government at its cost must market and promote the business on all its websites.
That's not nice.
In exchange, Madam Speaker, the government gets 15% equity in the business. Here it is, $4 million to renovate the factory shell, $1,000 for for each of the 100 persons for 18 months, $1,000. $500, Madam Speaker, for years and years to come. Pay all the operational expenses, pay for the marketing of Ojo Labs, and you get 15% investment, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this is from a government that removes the subvention to the National Trust, that's threatening to remove the duty-free status of the Catholic Church, that fired the nice workers, that removed laptops for children, that removed the distress fund for fire victims, that removed the subsidy for flour and sugar, that's increasing the tax on gas. But worse, Madam Speaker, Honorable Raymond fired them, and we learned they never take his advice. I hope you do. But worse, Madam Speaker, and it shows that this is not an Alan Shastney issue, but the entire government, Madam Speaker, because I learned that the Prime Minister tried to remove himself from the discussion at Cabinet, citing, I believe it was conflict of interest. You could correct me. But, Madam Speaker, the persons who sit behind did not know all the details. But they still voted for it. They are all guilty, Madam Speaker, all guilty. It is a cabal of men and women who do not love St. Lucia. Yes, you, each one of you all are guilty in that decision as it relates to Ojo Labs, Madam Speaker. But, Madam Speaker, but what was the conflict of interest, Madam Speaker? What was the conflict of interest that the Prime Minister did not want to be part of the discussion? Is it because the developer is a client of the Prime Minister's wife? Now, Madam Speaker, I don't think that's really the issue, because she has a right to earn a living like everybody else, and she has a right to lobby and to push for her client, Madam Speaker. The critical thing, Madam Speaker, is the extent of benefits given to the developer. And every single member on the other side must ask themselves, Madam Speaker, how do you go to bed feeling comfortable that you fired all those nice workers, and instead you're taking the money and you're paying the workers of a foreign investor? When foreign investors come into a country, they're supposed to bring the money, Madam Speaker. They're supposed to bring the money. Madam Speaker, on page 47 of the budget address, the Minister of Finance says that $10 million is allocated for NAPS, which includes two components, a call center, Ojo Labs, and hospitality training. So, Madam Speaker, we are borrowing money to pay the expense of a foreign investor. Because on page 464 of the estimates, almost $6 million of NAPS is from bonds. So we're borrowing money, raising bonds to raise money to pay the staff of Ojo Labs, pay the monthly operating expense of Ojo Labs. I do have a problem with it. I have a major problem with it. Because I don't mind, Madam Speaker, we're borrowing money to pay St. Lucia nice workers, but we're borrowing money to pay the expenses of a foreign investor, and members are asking me if I have a problem with that, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, as a St. Lucian, I really do have a problem with that, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the member from Ancillary Canaries was very vocal at the last sitting, as I said, Madam Speaker. But has he ever said anything about West Coast Foundation, Madam Speaker, and the American Hotel and Lodging Association? With all his big talk, Madam Speaker, I want him to explain to the Honourable House, because West Coast Foundation, Madam Speaker, because, Madam Speaker, there was a lot of talk in the media recently about training done by an organization called Caribbean Hospitality and Training Institute. And I want Honourable Member for Ancillary Canaries to tell me who owns it, who operates it. And, Madam Speaker, there was going to be hospitality training in this country. Not under NSDC, that usually happens, not under NRDF, but an organization has been set up called West Coast Foundation. And that contact was made with the American Hotel and Lodging Association, who was going to come and do training in St. Lucia at a cost of about $100 US, Madam Speaker. And if I had time, I would, Madam Speaker, show you, Madam Speaker, the listing of how much each course would have costed from the American Hotel and Lodging Association. But the Honourable Member will have to tell it, Madam Speaker. He will have to tell it. Because, Madam Speaker, he was stopped in his tracks, and somebody else ended up doing the training and charging not $100 US per head, but $1,000 a head, 1,000 EC. But for all his big talk, he could not stand up and stop that. It had to happen. You laughing? He had to allow it to happen. So, Madam Speaker, an organization called Caribbean Hospital and Training Institute did the training, not West Coast Foundation. And I'm wondering if the balance of the money from NAPS, since some is going to Ojo Labs, whether or not the Honourable Member is told to relax, you will get your training for West Coast Foundation and the NAPS. I don't know. He can probably explain that. But he says a lot, and he's very boisterous and very vocal, Madam Speaker. But he probably should explain to the people of St. Lucia. And Madam Honourable Member, when you are...
Madam Speaker, I rise on a point of order. On a point of order, Madam Speaker, the member is Standing Order 34B. 34A, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker. Yes, Madam Speaker. The Honourable Member is imputing improper motive, Madam Speaker, and he's disseminating erroneous information. There's no West Coast Foundation, Madam Speaker, that I am involved with. So I asked the Honourable Member to produce the incorporation documents, and I asked the Honourable Member to produce proof to this Honourable House that I am involved in any organization called West Coast Foundation. Thank you so very much. Let's not abuse parliamentary immunity.
Honourable Member for Ancillary Canaries.
Yes, Madam.
Improper motives, please. I'd like us to, all members, understand your standing orders and learn them, please. Please. And to my mind, I do not think, I'm sitting here, I do not think I understood the member to have indicated or heard him saying that you had interest in the said company.
Well, what he has implied, Madam Speaker, clearly, is that West Coast Foundation, somehow I was associated with it, and I attempted to do training via a West Coast Foundation. And so the Honourable Member, that is what he has said, and that is erroneous, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker, I shall move on.
And so, Madam Speaker, I ask that he withdraw the statement.
Which statement?
What
The
is
statement,
the statement?
the statement that the member for Ancillary Canaries has an organization called West Coast Foundation.
That has not been said here.
Madam
That
Speaker,
has
he is
not
implying
been said.
that I But of course, he has insinuated, Madam Speaker, and I want him to clarify whether the assumption is that I have an organization called West Coast Foundation and whether I have attempted to do training by that organization.
Madam Speaker, I can probably say it again. Yeah? That there was plans, I became aware that there were plans to do hospitality training. The plans would have included an organization called West Coast Foundation. I asked the Honourable Member from Anzac Canaries. He's involved in tourism. He's responsible for hospitality training. He came to this Honourable House and boasted of hospitality training. And I'm asking him to explain why did the West Coast Foundation was no longer the one that undertook the training. And I told him the information reaching me was that the training rather be done through NSDC, NRDF. It was proposed to be done through West Coast Training. But instead, a company called Caribbean Hospitality and Training Institute did it. And I can say to him, I have information from American Hotels and Trades Association as to how much they would have charged to do the training in St. Lucia at $100 US per person. Instead, I am told it was done by an organization, Caribbean Hospitality and Training Institute, and they charged 1,000 EC. Where in that statement, Madam Speaker, am I imputing that the Honourable Member has a personal interest in West Coast Foundation? Madam Speaker,
Thank you very much for clarifying.
Honourable Member, thank you for the clarification.
Madam Speaker, if the Honourable Member knows more than I have said, I leave that with his conscience, Madam Speaker. Yes. Madam Speaker, the problem with this government is that it promised to be transparent and entrench trustworthiness, but it has failed miserably. There is no transparency, no accountability, and no trustworthiness. The Prime Minister is governing like a banana peel, sliding from one instance of corruption and mismanagement to another. Never before, okay, Madam Speaker, sliding from one instance of mismanagement to another. Never before has the government been elected with such popular support and lost it so quickly. If the people of St. Lucia believe that the Labour Party was bad, this government is worse. The people of St. Lucia have replaced an imperfect friend with a deadly enemy. Madam Speaker, let me give you an example of the lack of transparency. In the estimates of expenditure and revenue, on page 29, there is an allocation of $500,000 for constituency offices. Was there an explanation given during the debate on estimates? Was there an explanation given in the budget statement? No, Madam Speaker. The same government which has passed an executive decision to grant elected members 100% duty-free on vehicles and 75% to nominated members. Since then, almost every member on the other side has bought a new vehicle, and one member on this side.
34.
Now,
Objection 34. On a point of objection, Madam Speaker. Standing Order 34A. The member suggests that nowhere in the contribution was an explanation given with regards to the increase in the constituency allowance. Is that what you said?
in the budget address.
In the budget address. Oh, okay, because the Honourable Minister did speak about it yesterday.
Yes. I saw the budget address. Yes. Now, Madam Speaker, I'm not speaking against the allocation to the constituency offices, Madam Speaker. I'm speaking about keeping it secret from the people of St. Lucia, Madam Speaker. This same government, which criticized increasing the constituencies, have increased the cost of maintaining Parliament by a greater amount. The same government that removed the subsidy for flour, sugar, that removed the laptop provisions, that increased gas tax, that removed the subvention for the National Trust, secretly increases benefits for the parliamentarians. The same government that increased the cost of cabinet by having 16 ministers. Is it true, Madam Speaker, and I'm asking the Minister of Finance, that government has approved personal assistance for every minister at a monthly salary of $6,500? Is that true, Madam Speaker? This will be a new expenditure of $1.2 million per year. Is it true, Honourable Minister of Finance? I don't know. Please inform me. Madam Speaker, was anything said last night, night before in the budget about the print tree, Madam Speaker? We heard you're closing Radio St. Lucia, Marketing Board, Fish Marketing Corporation. You've closed Tourist Board. What about the print tree, Madam Speaker? Is it going to be closed? Has a decision been taken? Why wasn't it announced in the budget, Madam Speaker? Madam Speaker, this budget is risky and irresponsible. It is playing Russian roulette with the future of our children. Whatever you may say about the member for Beaufort South, look at our region and how many countries fell into the trap of the IMF. St. Kitts and Nevis, Antigua, Barbuda, Dominica, Grenada. The member of Beaufort South ensured that we did not go to the IMF. He made some difficult decisions and he paid the price, Madam Speaker. It is sad that we are seeing a course being set again that will destroy our country and take us down the floats of the IMF. Madam Speaker, this budget is noted for its victimization and focus on promoting the interests of a few. It removes benefits for our children, the future of St. Lucia. It removes benefits for distressed families. It removes assistance to the National Trust. It removes assistance to poor people, and it removes support for the development of our arts. But, Madam Speaker, the most telling statement of the direction of this country was made by the Prime Minister in the closing statement of the debate on estimates and revenue. Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister was clearly saying that he knew the reduction of the 2.5% in the VAT has not brought about a reduction in the stores. He knew that there would be no reduction in the prices for consumers. The same prices he said that was causing hardships when he cried on demand. For when he then says that he knew now that the reduction would bring no benefit. Madam Speaker, how can you say you're reducing VAT by 2.5% and you said you knew when you reduce it, it would not change the prices in the stores for the consumers? Madam Speaker, fight to stay alive is truly fight to stay alive. The government is prepared to give businessmen the reduction benefit and not fight for the consumers to get any. The government does not care about the people of St. Lucia. They do not understand the common people and their struggles to stay alive. The tears, Madam Speaker, the crying on demand was all a game to get their votes. Madam Speaker, I have to ask a question in the few minutes I've left. Where does Castries South fit in all of this, Madam Speaker? The potential of Fuashu and Banan as part of the development of Port Castries, Madam Speaker, of the old cemetery, Madam Speaker. And I know I'm the rep, Madam Speaker, and I will say something, Madam Speaker. You know, other persons have been through it before. The member for Castries is, and he survived, Madam Speaker. I know, Madam Speaker, every effort will be made to ensure I never get re-elected, Madam Speaker. And it's operating at all levels, Madam Speaker. I've been left out of everything that's going on, Madam Speaker. Tomorrow, Madam Speaker, the Castries City Council, the mayor is making a tour of Castries South. I have not been informed, I have not been invited. He's visiting schools and other places, but I have not been informed or invited, Madam Speaker. Can you believe that, Madam Speaker? Can you believe that, Madam Speaker? Madam Speaker, a few days ago, an event has been held in Castries South. And then the organizers are inviting me as parliamentary rep, and the ministry is saying, for you to get support from the ministry, you must not appear political and invite the parliamentary rep. You must also invite the losing candidate of the United Workers' Party for you to get your support. That's what's been said, Madam Speaker. And the organizers said, we will invite her, but our rep is the one who will speak. Madam Speaker, that's what goes on. That's what I'm ready for, Madam Speaker. So that's what I am ready for, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, I know Castries South will suffer. And when anything is done in Castries South, Madam Speaker, it will be done behind my back without informing me, Madam Speaker. But, Madam Speaker, others have survived. And I too shall survive, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I know the member for Castries South is say under the CDP, he never got anything for Castries South East. I checked the records. About $3.7 million was spent in Castries South East, Madam Speaker. And it was misleading the House to say that Castries South East got nothing. The member may have been right to say they did not give him the money himself to do the things. But it was done in the constituency, Madam Speaker. You know, Madam Speaker, if the work is done in Castries South, Madam Speaker, I will be happy. Because even if they don't invite me, Madam Speaker, I will be standing by the fences looking in at the ceremony, Madam Speaker. But I will be there. Because we have to finish the multipurpose center in Bassett Joseph. The youth of Fuashu, Madam Speaker, they need a court, Madam Speaker. The dancers of Fuashu, they need support, Madam Speaker. The people of Cicero, the youths need a playing field, Madam Speaker. The Marigo playing field must be finished, Madam Speaker. And Marigo is one of the premier tourism sites in St. Lucia, Madam Speaker. And, Madam Speaker, there's nothing in this budget. I heard the honourable member speak of village tourism. Honourable member, that's an old idea, and I'm glad you're going to revive it and make it work. You could look at some of the legacy plans of Cricket World Cup, and you'll see all the plans. We had the heritage tourism program in St. Lucia, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, Castries South, Madam Speaker, I know will be made to suffer. Because, Madam Speaker, I have to be slighted, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Castries South is on the floor. Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Madam Speaker, for all the interruptions, can you tell me how much time I have left? Because I've been interrupted on so many occasions, Madam Speaker. How much time do I have left, Madam Speaker?
You were supposed to be winding. I was supposed to have given you a 5-minute mark, but I've added 5 minutes to it. Yes, go ahead. You will now finish at 5 minutes past 5.
Okay,
past 1, sorry.
I'll finish, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, I was saying, Bannon, Madam Speaker, the old cemetery, Madam Speaker, those areas need attention, and if there's going to be any redevelopment of Port Castries, Madam Speaker, I look forward to dialogue with all the people of those areas to discuss, Madam Speaker.
While at the beginning of the budget, the estimates, I indicated that members, it is your house, and some persons thought I was too stringent about time and allowing peacock across. The peacock will not be allowed across so as to disturb any member. That 2 other members are getting at each other and disturbing me from hearing the contribution of the member who's standing on his feet. Please be so guided. Honourable Member for Castries South.
Well, Madam Speaker, I knew that there would be frequent interruptions when I speak, Madam Speaker. So thank you very much for the protection that you've given me, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I have to say a few words about CIP, Citizenship by Investment Program. But, Madam Speaker, it's probably best that we leave it for the debate on the negative resolution. Because, Madam Speaker, no matter what is tried by the Prime Minister, the debate will take place, Madam Speaker. Suffice it to say, Madam Speaker, that the CIP has been discredited. It has become a shame for this land, Madam Speaker. And, Madam Speaker, the primary reason for it is not the fault of the professional people at the CIP unit. It is because of political interference in the running of the CIP, Madam Speaker. That is what is tarnishing the CIPs, Madam Speaker. And we are fast making a reputation globally as a country where politics decides who will get citizenship to St. Lucia through the CIP, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I made mention that when I was chairman of CIP, and Madam Speaker, the member for Miku South has said a lot about they had the wrong chairman, and that was his problem with CIP. We will debate that when we discuss the negative resolution. But, Madam Speaker, I don't want to attack other professionals, but the member will be well advised to look at his present chairman and decide whether or not his criticism can equally apply, Madam Speaker. But, Madam Speaker, I indicated that when I was chairman, we had discussions for a hotel in Canals, and I want the honourable member from Miku South to tell me, in the announcement of his budget address, is that hotel project the same project by the same company that had failed due diligence, Madam Speaker? And if somebody had failed due diligence, Madam Speaker, how is it now they can be approved to do projects in St. Lucia, Madam Speaker? And, Madam Speaker, we'll have a lot to say about people who failed due diligence in the months to come, Madam Speaker. But, Madam Speaker, you've heard a lot about Movie Tongue in Vieux-Fort. Who is the investor behind Movie Tongue, Madam Speaker? I need the honourable member from Miku South to tell St. Lucia that. Because, Madam Speaker, if the whispers I'm hearing, that it is the famous Jack Lamb, Madam Speaker, who was here in St. Lucia, I believe, at the signing ceremony, honourable member, the same person we've heard so much about. And I also heard, Madam Speaker, I don't know, and I need the honourable member from Miku South to clarify that this Jack Lamb has failed due diligence in other jurisdictions. And he's trying to get citizenship in St. Lucia. Tell us the details behind Movie Tongue, which is being proposed of Vieux-Fort. Who is the investor? Is it Jack Lamb? Is he an investor in the project? Is it somebody or people who failed due diligence, Madam Speaker? And all of that under CIP, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, presently, one bank in St. Lucia handles CIP monies. One Bank of St. Lucia. And there's already tremendous pressure, externally and internally, for it to stop, Madam Speaker. And to be stopped because there is suspected political interference in the decision-making of who gets citizenships in St. Lucia. Madam Speaker, we shall say more when we have the debate in this House on CIP, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this budget is the blueprint for a better St. Lucia. This government is not building a better St. Lucia. It is building a better St. Lucia. When a government can callously take away the subvention from the National Trust for opposing its actions, we are not building a better St. Lucia. We are building a better St. Lucia. When the government can get rid of over 1,000 nice workers with no regard for the welfare of their children who are the future of our island, we are not building a better St. Lucia. We are building a better St. Lucia. When the government can terminate the laptop program, denying all children a chance to learn and use technology, then we are not building a better St. Lucia. We are building a better St. Lucia. When the government can reduce the VAT in a manner knowing that the consumers in the most need will not benefit from it, but instead serve the narrow interests of themselves and their friends, then we are not building a better St. Lucia. We are building a better St. Lucia. When a government can terminate the distress funds for families who suffer from house fires and told to go and get insurance and stop being beggars, knowing they cannot afford to, we are not building a better St. Lucia. We are building a better St. Lucia. When the government brushes aside the advice and talents of its technocrats who have worked diligently under both UWP and SLP administrations and instead engage consultants for millions of dollars, we are not building a better St. Lucia. We are building a better St. Lucia. When the government does not understand that when people have been fired, been victimized, and have lost everything, then they are free to do anything, we are not building a better St. Lucia. We are building a better St. Lucia. When a government victimizes and fires skilled, educated, qualified, and talented St. Lucians because they were working or continue to work during the term of the SLP administration, we are not building a better St. Lucia. We are building a better St. Lucia. And when the victimized and the fired can on their own qualifications and talent get a new job in St. Lucia or even a regional job, and the government goes out of their way to block them from getting that job, we are not building a better St. Lucia. We are building a better St. Lucia. It is only when we can have a team of men and women to build a St. Lucia as a society that cares for all and an economy that works for all, then we can say that we are building a better St. Lucia. And this is the St. Lucia that we love. Madam Speaker, never before in the history of an independent St. Lucia have I ever seen this beloved country of ours so divided politically. In the past, we have seen divisions born from comments of agents, operatives of both parties. But the politicians, whilst they have chastised each other in this honourable House, their actions have never been as divisive as this present government. Madam Speaker, when you have the holders of the highest office of this land so bent on personal, institutional, and organizational victimization, what else do you expect from their agents, operatives, and colleagues? It is sad because these actions are dividing solutions rather than healing the nation after the results of June the 6th. Madam Speaker, I repeat, every single one on the opposite side are collectively responsible for allowing the Prime Minister, the Minister of Finance, the member for Microsoft to orchestrate and systematically build a better St. Lucia. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.